We've now been joined by Director David Burns, who is the Director of the Department of Human Services. Are you going to be accompanied by others?
Yes, I've asked Fred Swan and Sakina Thompson to join me for this testimony.
So Mr. Swan is here, and your spelling of your name, please?
S-A-K-I-N-A, Thompson. And I'm serving as the Interim Deputy Director for DHS.
The Interim Deputy Director. And Mr. Burns, you have an unusual situation because your voice is so strong that if you get as close as you got to the mic there, you know, you're going to blow us all away.
Okay.
So you have to put a little distance between you and the mic because your voice carries so very well. So we're now prepared to hear your testimony, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman Graham and other members of the committee and their staff. I'm David Burns, Director of the Department of Human Services, and I thank you for this opportunity to provide comments for this roundtable on the 2011-2012 winter plan. This is my first hypothermia season as the Director of the Department of Human Services. When considering my decision to accept this position, I was encouraged by the city's legal and ethical commitment and mandate to address the shelter and service needs of our homeless neighbors. The District of Columbia is one of only a few jurisdictions in the entire country that has a right to shelter during freezing weather. Since joining your team and community, I have also become familiar with the many challenges we face in preventing harm or death due to severe weather. I welcome this opportunity to jointly explore solutions to those challenges. As had been highlighted previously, the Department of Human Services has worked collaboratively with the Operations and Logistics Committee of the Interagency Council on Homelessness to develop the winter plan. The winter planning process included input from staff, advocates, service providers, the community, and our homeless neighbors that we serve. Over the past few years, the winter planning process has improved by inclusion of stakeholders and changes in the process for estimating the shelter capacity required to serve homeless men, women, and families. The current winter plan was approved by the Interagency Council on Homelessness. At the time it was presented to the Interagency Council, we believed, based on last year's experience, that the capacity included in the plan would be sufficient. New information in just the last even 24 hours calls into question some of our assumptions. And we are required to rethink certain portions of the winter plan and the allocation of resources that will be in that system. One of the major concerns that has been raised during the winter planning process and leading up to today has been the placement of Priority 1 families. At the end of the previous hypothermia season, intake into our homeless shelter for families at DC General was limited to those we moved from hotels where we had placed them during the previous winter. We worked with new Priority 1 families to help them find alternatives to shelter, but did not make new placements at DC General. This action was taken due to our legal requirements to both live within our budget and to have sufficient capacity during the hypothermia season. We met the winter plan capacity goal shortly after the beginning of this fiscal year. And with the additional guidance that the council and your staff gave us, as well as input from the advocates, we determined that or we believed that we would have sufficient capacity to meet the hypothermia requirements based on the vacancies we had at that time, and began to place some of the most emergent Priority 1 families into the DC shelter. This decision was made on Friday, October 14th, with first placements entering on Monday, October 17th. Yesterday, we received another 40-some Priority 1 families that came over to the Virginia Williams seeking placement. And when I came over here today, we had well over 30 new ones, so the number is much greater than what we had expected. I'd like to provide the Council with a bit of background for this year's winter plan decision. The District of Columbia has experienced increased demand for family shelters since 2008. Until the end of 2008-2009 hypothermia season, it was the standard practice, as I understand it, in the district to close the DC General Family Shelter at the end of each hypothermia season and to reopen it at full capacity at the beginning of the next season. We were able to do this and to continue to place Priority Family 1 families during the summer weather as needed throughout the summer and fall. And this was because the number of Priority 1 families coming through our intake center at that time was far fewer, and the demand did not exceed our ability to absorb them through other means, as it does now. With the increased year-round demand for family shelter, as well as requests from the advocacy community, DHS authorized year-round operation of the shelter as of April 1st, 2009. As a result, the shelter was completely occupied at the beginning of the 2009-2010 hypothermia season, and again at the beginning of the 2010-2011 hypothermia season. The lack of unoccupied capacity at DC General Family Shelter at the beginning of the 2010 hypothermia season resulted in significant overcrowding, with multiple families sharing the same room and a wide range of complaints from families and advocates. This was also the impetus for legislation that required all families to have their own separate room at the shelter. The lack of unoccupied capacity at DC General Family Shelter at the beginning of the 2010 season resulted in the need to use hotel rooms to supplement the capacity. This created several operational challenges and increased the cost, resulting in the need to use funding outside of the Homeless Services budget. At the end of this past hypothermia season, on April 1st, 2011, there were 30 families remaining in hotels. To minimize the on-budget expense, we placed those families from the hotels into any and all vacancies that were created at the DC General Family Shelter. All families from the hotels were placed in shelters or other homes by the first week of July. And then starting in July, new openings at DC General were left unfilled in order to have sufficient beds available at the beginning of the hypothermia season. During the preparation and development of the winter plan, it was estimated that there would be an increased demand for at least 57 additional family shelter units beyond what was included in the budget. This additional capacity was created in order to meet this additional need by not filling vacancies at DC General until at least the end of, or until our hypothermia reserves were met and possibly even beyond. None of us were satisfied with this solution, but we struggled to find other practical means of meeting the need. To help mitigate the problems associated with this, what I think is a horrendous approach, but the only one that we could legitimately come up with at the time, we worked with Priority 1 families, which are those families that report that they have nowhere to go. We provided them with assistance such as referrals to other shelter and housing programs, first month's rent and security deposit for housing, and referrals and connections to housing programs, and indeed encouragement to work with friends, neighbors, families to share residences at this time. When we finally exceeded the needed 57 vacancies at DC General, and with, again, the additional guidance from the council staff and consultation with the advocates, we made the decision to begin placing priority one families with the most critical need for shelter. Again, this decision was made on Friday, October 14th. The first placements went in on just this last Monday, just 4 days ago. And since that time, I think we had like 17 families the first day, and then by Wednesday again, another 40-some. And who knows how many we've had today since we've been in here for the last 3 or 4 hours. But we have decided to go ahead and fill up to the entire full capacity of DC General at this time. We think it's the right thing to do. We know it is the guidance from the council, and we're making every effort to get as many of those families as we can at this time into the shelter. We, just based on the numbers that we've seen, though, we'll probably, we could have already exceeded the capacity at DC General as of today, which leaves us back in the same situation that we were last week. By the end of today, we will expect to have placed at least 37 of those priority one families into the shelter. And we're not surprised that there's while we weren't surprised that there was some pent-up need, we really did not expect this huge influx so quickly. This will require us to take a very serious look at whether the allocation of homeless services funding is appropriately allocated among our programs. And I can say with some certainty that we will come to the conclusion that it isn't, and that we'll have to make some significant adjustments in the allocation of those funds. In my short time here in the district, I've seen that while not perfect, we generally do have sufficient capacity for individual adults. That's not the case of the shelter capacity for families with children. And we believe that the current crisis facing the District of Columbia is not a capacity or resource crisis within the homeless services program, but rather the current resource crisis is one of lack of affordable housing. Since 2008, the homeless services program has increased capacity within the system for families in every program category: hypothermia shelter, temporary shelter, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing. For example, the DC General Family Shelter has more than doubled in capacity from 75 units in 2008 to 153 units in 2011. And DHS programs alone have created nearly 400 new community-based family transitional housing and 250 permanent supportive housing slots for families since 2008 to try to address the increased demand for shelter and indeed the demand for permanent housing. But the challenge is not entirely shelter capacity. Rather, it's the inability of families to exit the system in a reasonable time frame. The pace of system entries far exceeds the pace of system exits. And this is, again, a direct result of the lack of affordable housing for these families. Mayor Gray and our office are working on several initiatives along with the community to help address this challenge. Mayor Gray has reactivated the Comprehensive Housing Task Force, of which I'm a member, and which is looking at the entire lack of affordable housing and finding solutions as quickly as possible. But as you would well expect, it is somewhat of a slow process. DHS has recently launched its Sweat Equity Initiative, which provides homeless families who are TANF recipients with on-the-job training, employment, and the opportunity to exit homelessness and to move into the very housing that participants work to rehabilitate. We're also working on ways to expand this program and to give this opportunity to more homeless individuals and families. We're working closely with the Department of Housing and Community Development, the Department of Mental Health, and the DC Housing Authority to develop a collaborative process for pooling our resources to create more affordable housing and other initiatives across agencies to provide housing resources for individuals and families who are homeless. A recent great example of which you've mentioned a few times is the new 19-unit Mississippi Avenue project that we recently conducted the ribbon cutting ceremony for, which will provide permanent housing for 15 families and 4 single adults. And DHS and the Community Partnership are working together to harness additional resources for individual adults who use our shelter system to help them reduce their need for shelter through addressing the barriers to self-sufficiency and providing additional work readiness and job placements. Lastly, DHS is working with the Interagency Council on Homelessness to develop a system redesign initiative that we believe will facilitate quicker system exits for homeless families. Over the coming months, we will be sharing these initiatives with the broader stakeholder community and with the Committee on Human Services. As we move forward, we will continue to work to meet the immediate critical needs of our homeless neighbors while developing and implementing initiatives that address their longer-term needs. We're aggressively looking at how to allocate resources within the system to maximize services for both individuals and families, and thank our partner agencies for coming to the table and joining us as we all work together to address these pressing issues. And again, I thank you for this opportunity to testify and stand ready to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. I appreciate your testimony. And first off, I want to say how much I support your decision, to begin to fill the vacancies at DC General. I mean, we have another relatively balmy day in Washington today. I was outside earlier. It's a lovely day, lovely early fall day. But that weather is going to turn. And so I think that as much as we'd like to preserve our resources, when we're faced with desperate need, such as you are, I think, in the priority 1 cases, I don't know how we could do anything other than to simply fill the vacancies. Now, I have a number of questions, though. Much of this is related to the budget.
Sure.
But I'm a little bit interested, I'm puzzled really, about the sudden flood of applications. You said it was a pent-up need. It's like, how come all of this has surfaced in the last couple of days? I mean, aren't these applications usually kind of staggered and they come in over a course of time? I mean, how do we end up with so many applicants within a 48-hour period? I mean, were they being bottled up in the system? That's what my concern is. Was something happening? Was there a roadblock that was holding them back, and then you've decided to relieve the roadblock, and then they came forward?
I think you've hit it on the head. The word was out that we were not placing people into shelter. We were working with them on other alternatives, but they were not the alternatives that were preferred, especially as we tried to assist them to move in with neighbors and family members. When the word got out, appropriately so, people heard now was the time to come over, and it took a few days for the first folks to hear, a few more days for the next, and now the word is out. But Fred may have some more.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is also, again, it is because we've gone from almost 6 months of not placing families to now suddenly placing families. So a lot of it is folks do now understand that we are placing families. But the interesting thing is, from what I can tell thus far, looking at initial analysis, is these are not necessarily the same priority 1 families that weren't getting placed from April to September. So it says to me that there's that these are by and large new families, and we can look at the data and the names to analyze how many of them may be priority ones that came in the previous period, but it appears at least now that they are new priority one families. So I think that makes the analysis a little bit different. I mean, it'd be much more understandable if it was a lot of the same families who had came in previously who are now saying, okay, now the shelter's open, I can come in. But these are actually new priority one families from what we can tell thus far. So that makes the dynamic a little bit different, and I think it is just the word is out. And there are a number of different reasons potentially for that, but I think it's just the word is out. It's been a long time since we haven't placed families, and there could just honestly be new families that have that need right now.
You know, we have, let me back up a little bit to the budget situation, you know, and I do want to acknowledge the leadership of our chairman, Kwame Brown, because we were faced with some horrendous choices after the committee reported the budget, because we were shy some $20 million from the loss of the federal subsidy, and so we were really in a bind. But the council did come forward, and Chairman Brown was instrumental in providing the funds necessary to avoid much of those really dreadful consequences. But when I left this budget in June for DHS, I thought that we had DC General Family Shelter funded to full capacity year-round in the FY12 budget. I thought that we had avoided, I thought that we had our emergency low-barrier shelter funded for both hyperthermia and hypothermia seasons. And I thought that we had permanent supportive housing units funded for continuation. There wasn't any new money for new units. I don't know what the history, I think Mississippi Avenue took some years to put into place, and so that was probably more of a pipeline issue rather than new money. And we had some, I think we might have had some cuts in rapid housing, and rent supplement certainly took a cut and so forth. But generally speaking, I thought that we had done pretty well. And now, I have to say that we went through the budget process without a whole lot of discussion of hotels. Now, you weren't here, Director Burns, but Mr. Swan was here, and he will remember that. And so I don't recall there being any particular funding made available in the FY12 budget for hotels. I don't know if, was there money in the FY11 budget targeted for hotels?
No.
Well, you see that, so we continued the FY11 into the FY12, which maybe as much as anything else explains the bind that we're in. What is your comment on all of that? I mean, first, you know, did I accurately state what the budget situation was?
Yes. My understanding was very similar, just a little bit different. And I believed right up until the last few days that the funding that was provided would be sufficient to meet the capacity in all of the programs that you mentioned. I think where I had a somewhat different understanding from that was in the family shelter, that we would take and not be placing families during the summer months, and that we would build up the capacity so that we would be able to use DC General as our primary hypothermia placement setting. So it was somewhat confusing, but I thought that we would have vacancies at DC General when hypothermia season started, and that both with those vacancies and with continuing to move families into the other elements of the pipeline, housing and all throughout the year, we'd be able to meet the family shelter capacity within the budget that was provided. Right. It's the new...
Director, with respect, Director Burns, I don't know where you got that message from, because it certainly did not come from me. I mean, and I think Mr. Swan will remember our conversations where I wanted to see DC General operate on a year-round basis. I thought it was funded to be operating at a full capacity on a year-round basis. So we don't have to, you know, it's now water under the bridge or over the dam, whichever one you want.
Can I add something?
Pardon me?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that.
Well, let me just finish my sentence.
Sure.
And then we're very anxious to have all your comments, Mr. Swan. But I've proceeded on the assumption, as it turned out, not a valid assumption, that we were filling the vacancies at DC General. And so I'm glad we're doing it now. We have a problem to deal with, but I'm glad we've reversed that policy. Mr. Swan?
Yeah, just to provide some background context, that the funding, the $17 million funding for the FY12 budget was slated to do just that, just as you stated. What changed things somewhat is during the previous winter season, of course, as we've explained, there were families placed in hotels. At the end of the season, there was still approximately about 30 families still remaining in hotels. And the priority was to get those families out of hotels into shelter, because that wasn't budgeted for, and we didn't want to continue to exceed and accumulate expenses going beyond the hypothermia season. So the reason why, going back to April 1st, 2011, that placements weren't, new families were not placed, is because we're in the process of placing those families out of hotels into DC General. And that process didn't get completed until early July of 2011. So from April 1st to July 2011, we were placing the families from the hotels as vacancies were created at DC General.
From what date?
From April 1st to about the first week of July. So what we were doing was placing families into DC General as vacancies became available.
But then you stopped.
Yes, and then what happened is we actually started the winter planning process probably sometime in late May, and that process moved through obviously the end of August. By the time that we were able to place all the families from hotels into DC General, that's when we were at the final stages of the winter plan preparation, and that's when we determined that there would be a need for these additional 57 units. And that's when those decisions were made in terms of the capacity.
But, you know, I thank you, I appreciate that. The winter plan, though, has told us, whether, you know, it proves true or not, but they have said that there are capacities for men and women, low barrier, emergency shelters for the winter period are adequate. Am I right?
Yes.
I don't know that we had any similar numbers for youth. Did we?
No, we didn't, and actually that's interesting because Maggie Riley, who wasn't able to give her testimony, has been participating in the ICH, and so we didn't get provided any particular numbers as it relates to youth. But at our last interagency council meeting for operations logistics, she did mention that there may be some additional capacity needs for the winter, and I asked her to give me an estimate of what that was. So I'm just waiting on that feedback.
It should be in the winter plan. We should have this in the winter plan. I mean, this is how young people have been kind of left out, you know, because now what we're proceeding to do now, obviously, is to focus in on what are unanticipated, I guess you could say, unanticipated needs relating to families. But independent youth, there may be unanticipated needs there that we need to be aware of. And so I don't know, but I think where we are right now, to kind of cut to the quick, is that we have a winter plan before us, which is valid for certain purposes, but very questionable for other purposes. And the very questionable part is obviously for families. I mean, I don't feel right now that I can rely on what the winter plan is projecting, which was an increase of 18 families. Do I remember that right?
Yes.
18 families. And maybe it's right, but it looks like it's not right. And I think that what we need to do is to figure out just where we are. Now, the place to start is with the budget. Did you fully spend the FY11 homeless budget?
They're doing our OCFO are doing the final reconciliation now, so we should know within the next few days or by early next week.
The total homeless budget is how much, federal and local?
For FY11?
For FY11.
Was about $112 million.
For FY12?
About $99 million.
Okay, because we still had a cut there that we had to sustain due to the loss of the federal
dollars, yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of the FY11, the $111 million, you have no sense at this point as to how much of that was spent and how much of it wasn't spent?
No, I don't have the exact numbers, but I should have that probably tomorrow.
Because, you know, we had testimony by Kelly Sweeney McShane from the Community of Hope raising questions about whether that as of June 2011, DC had spent only 62% of its HUD grant.
Yeah, and you're talking about the HPRP HUD grant, and that's a grant that spans until July of 2012. So it's not money that had to be spent during the FY11 fiscal year.
So there's money left there to spend into the future.
Yes.
Well, that's good news. So we're not leaving that money on the table. But I am very interested in knowing how we're doing in terms of our local dollar spending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I can tell you we typically spend all our local dollars, because if there is any unspent dollars, it's typically the federal dollars, which we can then carry over into the new fiscal year.
Okay. Then at this point, I think we should view this as a budget crisis. It's about to become a human crisis, but it's a budget crisis. Do you have any sense of how many additional families we're going to have to accommodate that are unanticipated by the winter plan?
It's hard to make that assumption at this point. I think what we try to assume.
But Mr. Swan, forgive me for interrupting you, but we're here. Mm-hmm. You know, we've got to have a different answer than that, with all due respect, because we're on the verge of this happening, and we know that the numbers are difficult to come up with, but we've got to do what we can. I mean, that's what the winter plan is all about. That's what this hearing is all about.
Right. And what we've done is, on two sides. One, what we have anticipated is that if the 57 units that were in the plan to be vacant are not vacant, we have anticipated that we'll need to replace those with likely hotel units. That we have anticipated.
Is DHS willing to consider other options?
Of course.
In other words, I presented 3 options, you know, which are obvious. They're just common sense. I mean, there are 2 floors of DC General that we're not using that we could open in full or part. There are perhaps other facilities within the system, although our review of the census suggests that they're all full, but there may be some other facilities that we could increase capacity at. Or we could create new facilities. I mean, those are the 3 options that I have in mind. Maybe there's other options I haven't thought of, but something's got to give, because we've already projected 18 unanticipated families in the scheme of things, and you think it's going to be much higher. So is there a way of analyzing the various options that are on the table?
Yeah, I've been in contact with B.B. Otero today, and as well as the mayor's budget director. We're going to have an emergency meeting first thing next week to consider what options, both funding and programmatic, we can put on the table and ways to approach that. I've also had sidebar conversations with Sue Marshall today on some other approaches, such as prepaid apartment units that we could bring online more quickly so that we could move some more families not into permanent housing. These would be short-term apartments, but as an alternative, we're looking at any and all options and welcome any guidance and ideas. Of course, we have thought about the expansion of the DC General, and we did hear Councilmember Wells say, yeah, that's one idea, but we know that locating that many families into one school district presents difficulties. So there isn't one ideal, but we'll be finding solutions, because we will meet our mandated requirement during the hypothermia season to place all of these families.
While it has all of these things have drawbacks.
They do.
You know, I mean, I don't. If anybody's listening to this and thinks that I think this is an easy decision, think again, because it isn't. But the hotel is going to be costing us $3,000 a month.
Right.
$100 a day. 100 times 30 is what I did, you know, give or take. $3,000 a month for each family. For $3,000 a month, you know, I'm sure there are apartments in the District of Columbia that landlords would be willing to lease to us on short-term basis. Actually, for much less than that, depending upon the size of the family.
That is the discussion I had with Sue Marshall just minutes before this hearing.
I don't think, the point is that I think the cost of the hotels deters me from immediately embracing that as an option.
Right.
And the location of many of these hotels is not really Jim Dandy either. I mean, it seems as though we're still relying on that New York Avenue corridor, which has changed very dramatically from what it used to be. But it's still inaccessible. It's difficult for various reasons if you don't have a car. And I assume many of these people do not have cars. So, I mean, I think we need to come up with, you know, on the other hand, what would it cost to open a floor at DC General?
It would be some rehab cost. I think when we did an estimate, we had an estimate done probably last summer for expanding to about 100 additional units. I think the rehab costs were just under $1 million, about $900,000.
For one floor, and how many?
I don't know if it was one floor or both floors, but it was about 100 total new units.
100 new units?
Of shelter capacity.
How can that be? Because right now you're operating on 3 floors.
Right.
And you've got 150, give or take, units, families accommodated. I don't know how you get 100.
Yeah, and I think there's actually, there may be actually more than, because there's also, for example, we operate the second floor, but only one side of it. So there's space left on the other side. That's a duplicate of the side that we're using, that they can also rehab. So, and then there will be obviously operational costs in addition to the upfront rehabilitation costs. And we can figure that, but my guess is for about 100 additional units, operational costs will likely be in the range of about $250,000 a month, probably at a minimum, for ongoing monthly operational costs. One comment I would make on the hotels.
Oh, that's expensive.
Yeah, because there's staff, there's food, there's security. Then there's provider costs that go into that overall cost.
Well, we project hotel placements at $1,050,000 for the
57.
Hotel placements, and that's for a period of April through September. How many months is that? April through September?
That should be 6 months.
6 months. So for 6 months, and if you opened a floor or a half a floor at DC General, how does that compare to the cost of the hotel placements?
Well, both
per person. Per family.
Per family. Well, you'd include the upfront rehabilitation costs for a heart mania. So if you did a comparable, say 50 units of a shelter versus 50 hotel units, you're talking about some upfront costs for rehabilitation, and then for 50 units, it may be closer to the range of about maybe $175 to $200 a month operational costs for about an additional 50 units. So in a 6-month time period, you'd be looking at it roughly about the same. But one thing I would say both about shelter units and about the hotel units is it's not a fixed thing where only one family is going to be in there for the course of the time. So though a hotel room may cost $3,000 per month, you're going to likely have multiple families using one room in the course of a month period, because families don't necessarily come in and stay for a multiple month period. There is flow in and out of the system. So just as last year when we used the hotels, all the families that initially came into the health did not stay in the hotel. Most of them did eventually get placed in DC General. So other families use those rooms as well. So there is turnover. So it's not as simple as one family is going to cost us $3,000 a month for a hotel room, because we do get system flow as well as in the shelter units as well.
Just by the way, as a brief diversion, on an important point, how many families have become self-sufficient and left DC General Family Shelter in the past year?
We'd have to look at the HMIAS, the database system data. I wouldn't have that number off the top of my head.
Well, do you have an idea? I mean, you're very close to this stuff.
I would probably say percentage-wise, probably a small percent.
5%?
Probably 5% would probably be a max.
So those that are leaving DC General, whatever movement you have there is to other aspects of the homeless.
Yeah, typically they're going to permanent supportive housing or a transitional program or a temporary shelter.
Well, what do you think how do people react to the choice between a hotel room or DC General?
Oh, I can tell you that a hotel room is much more desirable than DC General.
Even though it might not be that much bigger.
Right. And it's much more desirable because you have your private space. There's a little bit more. The way it operates is a little different. It's a hotel room. There's privacy. You have your own private bath quarters. And depending on the hotel, you may have your own refrigerator, you may have your own microwave. So there's typically more privacy and amenities there that you won't have a DC General shelter. And you don't have the rules aren't the same exactly at a hotel as they are at shelter.
Right. So that's a major plus for
Yes.
hotels. And the folks that we have in hotels, are we feeding them as well?
It depends. Again, we have the main hotel that we were using initially during last winter. It had refrigerators and microwaves. So the vast majority of the families that we have are receiving TANF as well as food stamps. So for those families, they were using their food stamps to get meals. We were supplementing meals as necessary. For example, we can give them food cards. And also, we can transport them over to DC General for meals as well.
But people are being fed at DC General.
Yes.
Even people who have TANF and who have
Yes.
food stamps, we're still feeding them.
Yes.
I don't know. I guess one of the reactions I have is that what was the condition of the hotel? Was it a nice hotel?
We use a number, I think a total of 3 different hotels during the course of the winter season, and they weren't 5-star hotels by any stretch of the imagination, but I would say that these were
not too many 5-star.
right. But these were hotels. For example, New York Avenue had been recently remodeled, so I think they were decent hotels. They weren't your better hotels in the city, but they were decent hotels.
Because I recently stayed in a hotel in Los Angeles, and the hotel was just a little over $100, and I thought it was really fine. And so I wonder about why we couldn't get a better price on these hotel rooms.
And it does depend on the time when you're renting the rooms, the
Right.
days, and it depends on the hotel, because some of the hotels were cheaper than others. So that may be an average price, but some hotels were below the $100 range.
Right, because you've got a situation where you're at peak season for Washington.
Exactly.
Because you're in this summer. And what about transportation? Who is paying for that?
What we would do in that situation is, obviously, the hotline would provide transportation as needed if they're going to and from either Virginia Williams to get placed in a hotel, if they're going to and from DC General as well. And then we also would provide tokens or other assistance, transportation as needed, particularly to get to schools or get to other places.
Now you project, if we go the hotel route, you project a total additional cost of $2.7 million for FY12.
Yeah, as an estimate, yes.
Right, and so you've got some placements during the hypothermia season, then you've got placements a little bit into the hypothermia season, and hyperthermia, hypothermia and hyperthermia, and then you've got some additional. What is this additional 50 hotel placements?
What that is that we anticipated replacing the capacity of the 57 vacancies with 57 hotel units during the hypothermia season. But in order to continue to be able to place priority 1 families come April 1st when the winter season is over, it's likely that those 57 units that we start off using will likely be full, or probably a large portion of them are. So we're able to continue to place priority 1 families from April 1st moving forward. It's likely that we will have to utilize additional or bring on additional capacity to be able to not just keep the families that are already in placements there, but to also bring in new priority 1 families.
Now, are there any families today in hotels?
No.
So, but you had 30, is that what I'm?
Yeah, we had 30 at the end of the previous hypothermia season, but they were all out by July.
Where did they go?
The combination, most of them went to DC General. Some of them may, and we can look at the records, but some of them may have went to some of the housing programs, but I would say the vast majority of them got placed at DC General or maybe some of the community-based shelter units.
Even though you were reserving 57?
Right, we weren't at that time. When the season ended in April, we were not reserving units. We were just moving the families out of hotels.
How difficult was it to move people out of hotels?
I mean, there was some logistical challenges to that. But as soon as we had a space available at DC General, we would notify the family that a space was available and give them the appropriate amount of time to be able to get them into DC General, and we would provide transportation or whatever was needed.
One of the things that may have operated in the last few days is just simply word-of-mouth knowledge that shelter was available again. Mm-hmm. How do you think this word-of-mouth knowledge is going to operate when people become aware of the fact that we are anticipating 107 hotel placements?
Well, I don't know that people necessarily, well, they may know that now, but I think that does, I think that definitely.
I think if I was listening to this hearing, I'd be on the phone.
Yes.
You know, hoping that somebody was still working at DHS.
Yeah, and I think it does, because one of the things we talked about in our, as Mr. Todd spoke about our hypothermia debriefing meeting, which is the kind of preliminary to our winter planning for the next season. One of the things that we did notice over the previous winter season is that the hotel placements did pique people's interest and did drive capacity to a certain extent, because obviously a hotel placement is much more desirable, not just then to go to DC General, but is in many senses much more desirable than being doubled up with a family member or friend, even though we may be able to continue to stay with that family member or friend.
Right. No, I can see it. And you know, the word is now out that we are preparing to accommodate 57 family hotel rooms for 5,032 room nights during the hypothermia season. I mean, that's what, you know, I mean, we can't operate in secret.
No.
You know, and so there you go. I mean, and then
unless we find some of the other alternatives that you
right,
spoke of.
Exactly. And I think that's what we should be exploring. Mm-hmm. Because I think this is going to have an elastic quality to it. Highly elastic quality to it, in terms of this is going to be greater and greater demand. And, you know, and I'm against the residency requirements that this council passed. I think it was late last year or early this year. But, you know, at some point, there undoubtedly are going to be people coming from outside the District of Columbia to say, you go to D.C., you get a hotel room. And it's in a decent hotel. And we've got a car? What do you say to that?
One of the things that I did discuss with Sue Marshall even today was that it should not be the new placements that go into the hotel, but those that have been possibly first stabilized at DC General, maybe have been there for a while, they're ready to move to another level. So if we did have to use hotels, people wouldn't think that they and be able to come in and just get a hotel room on the first night that they came in. There are problems, of course, associated with hotels, and you have to provide some security, some support services, 24-hour availability, especially if you don't know exactly who you're placing, and also I think the system is better served by offering this to those that are most stable and ready to take advantage of that, rather than the new person that we're just learning right off the street.
Right. Now, it's another interesting dimension to this is that you have a pending list.
Yes.
And that pending list has 479 families currently pending.
Yes.
But none of them are priority one.
No. At least not at the time that they were placed on the pending list and through whatever contact that.
So they're priority 2 and priority 3 families.
Yes.
And so why are they on a list? Because we're never going to get to them.
Well, because their status may change.
But then they become priority 1. They
yes.
come in and they say we're priority 1. But
right.
Why are we maintaining a pending list of priority 2 and priority 3 families when? You know what I'm saying? I mean,
right.
It just seems like an exercise in futility.
Right. Now, we do, though, even though they don't get placement, we do provide other services, referral services to other programs, housing programs. We do provide some other assistance to those families as well.
Okay. So there are services, there may be services available to them by being on this list.
Yes.
But not housing.
But not, well, they may be able to connect them to another housing program, maybe outside of our system.
Not our system.
Right.
Housing, I meant to say. And that's a lot, 479. By the way, we had testimony that Virginia Williams was applying the residency test, which had not taken effect yet. Right.
Well, what I would say to that is we've always had a residency requirement in the HSRA.
But not the one that the council recently.
Exactly. And it's my understanding that that's the policy that they're implementing, not the new residency policy. I had some discussion with some of the advocates about this earlier. And there's some things that I will definitely look into, but my understanding is that what they're implementing is the current policy that was on the books.
Right. And what is the status of the rules on the new residency?
We are working, and actually I can let Sakina comment on that, but we are working to, we have a lot of concerns about how we implement the new residency policy. So one of the things that we wanted to do before we move to implement it is really look at that, come up with a good plan and a good analysis of how that policy should be implemented. Once we do that, we'll implement the rules, but in addition to that, provide training to all our providers who will be implementing this new rule to make sure they understand how we expect it to be delivered. And then once the training is completed and the rules are published, then we will implement the policy.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's constitutional, by the way. And I think somebody is going to challenge this. I don't know what other jurisdictions are able to do in this regard, but I think the existing Supreme Court decisions on what it takes to be a resident are fall far away from what we're requiring here. I mean, do you think it makes sense? I guess we haven't implemented it yet, so we don't know what the rules are, so why should I ask any questions? I mean, because the rules will tell the tale. You know,
right.
So I'm not going to get into that until we see the rules, but I'm very concerned about that issue, and I know that my colleagues were well-intentioned and well-motivated when they passed it, but I couldn't support it then, and I don't support it now. How long do you think it's going to take you to get a handle on this issue of just what we've got to do? Because now that it seems as though we've woken up one morning and found a demand that we didn't realize existed, and now it exists. So when will we hear back from you in terms of your
This is a definite priority. Again, it's the decision that I announced is with the full support of the mayor's office and his budget office.
What decision was that?
That we're filling the capacity.
No, I got that part.
No, well, along with that is the fact that we will be meeting on Monday to explore and look at all of the options that we have and how we can best invest these funds. And I think the best investment, as you alluded to, for $30,000 or for $3,000 a month, we can probably come up with a whole lot better permanent or housing options rather than shelter options. And if we can speed the time that people will move through the system, rather than just expand the number of shelter beds, but shorten the time, we would have the capacity and better meet the needs of people. So that's the direction that we're moving, to look and see what we can do to get them into better, at least more permanent solutions, rather than opening necessarily either hotels or even a lot more shelter capacity.
You know, we're about to get a report, thank you all for being here throughout the hearing. I think it's very important that when we have our agency directors and our agency leadership at the hearing, it's very important that our viewers know that that happened. And I thank you very much for that. I think that you heard that there's a new report coming forward on youth homelessness. And that gives us the opportunity. I don't know what it is. I haven't seen it. We haven't seen a draft or anything. But you know, I think you should add to your conversations with the mayor the issue of youth homelessness, and to what extent are there additional capacity that we need for that population. And I would ask you to do
Definitely.
that. I mean, I think the winter plan has been approved by everybody on the ICH with one abstention. They tell us that our men's shelter and our women's shelters are fine. But I would add the youth issue, so for you to do that. And I think what I have a lot of other questions. Yes, we do. Huh? But I think what I'm going to do is to recess this hearing, which will enable me to reconvene it on very short notice, because I'd like you to come back and tell me what you're going to do, what you propose to do.
Great.
I really do. And we ought to be able to reconvene the hearing for the other questions that we have, and also at the same time, because this issue of these families is extremely pressing for me and for you and for everybody involved. And I want to know what the plan is, because that's what this hearing is about, the winter plan. And we haven't, there's an important element here, we just